So thanks everybody for coming to learn about sloths. They are amazing and super interesting. And I finally have a stuffy that is a sloth. Everyone shows off their stuffies and their coloring and their drawings all week or every week. And I can show you my little friend. He's real nice. And I will actually use him later to show off some cool sloth things, which is kind of hard to say. So sloths are mammals, which is pretty neat. Some people think that they're primates. They are not. They are actually more related to anteaters or armadillos, and they are super duper ancient, which is also really, really neat to think about. I'm going to tell you about some old sloths and then some sloths that exist now. And as always, show you some pictures. So there's two types of sloths in the world. But there's actually quite a few in the prehistoric fossil record. There were 6 prehistoric sloths. So I'm going to tell you about 2 because I think that they are amazing. One is the giant ground sloth. It was the size of an elephant. What? So just think about like a sloth, this guy, elephant, that friend, elephant sized. Now, they are amazing to think about because they are the reason that we have avocados. So remember when we talked about bats and we talked about birds being seed dispersers, that bats and birds will eat berries and then they fly away and then they poo the berries out. So when they poo the berries, the poo is the manure for those berries, and new berries and trees and things like that grow. So they disperse seeds all through the forest and all through jungles. Now, giant ground sloths did that with avocados. They would eat full avocados. They would go all through their system. And the avocado pit, while it seems very big to us, if we were going to try to eat it, they're so big, it just passed through their body totally fine and they didn't even notice. So when they would eat a bunch of avocados, they would walk into the jungle or to a different area. They would poo the avocado pits and their poo would fertilize it and new avocado trees would grow. So the whole reason that we have avocados is because of the giant prehistoric ground sloth. Thank you, ground sloth. We can have avocados on toast. Now, they were alive for a really long time, but around 11,000 years ago, they started going extinct, and of course, they aren't around anymore. That does mean that they were on Earth the same time that humans were on Earth, which is also kind of crazy to think about. So they were around the same time of as like woolly mammoths and things like that. Scientists aren't 100% sure why they became extinct. They think that there was some climate change, but also they were hunted by humans so much they became extinct. So it's you know, something to think about. Maybe we shouldn't be hunting sloths because we could have even more avocados. The other amazing sloth is very hard for me to say for some reason, but I digress. The other amazing one to think about is from 2.5 to 5 million years ago, and it is called the marine sloth. I just learned that this exists. I am super excited about it. It was a sloth that lived off the coastal waters of Peru, and it ate seagrass and seaweed. So basically the same things that green sea turtles eat. They just had sea lettuce all the time, and they got really, really big, just like green sea turtles. So they lived off these coastal areas. They were semi-aquatic, which meant they were like beavers or otters, that they live a lot of time in the water, but they can also go up on land. So they're really, really interesting in the fossil record because they are animals, you know, 5 million years ago when we were trying to figure out, or when animals were trying to figure out if they should be in the sea, on land, what they should be doing. These giant marine sloths were swimming around eating all the fun little seagrass on the bottom of the forest sea floor, which is so neat. They were really, really big. They swim around, which is a little bit different from sloths right now. So there are 2 types of sloth, but there are 6 different species of sloth. The sloths, I'm going to be able to say it by the end of this, are broken up into 2 families. They have 2-toed or 3-toed sloths. So a 2-toed sloth has 2 toes on the front feet and 3 toes on the back feet. A 3-toed sloth has 3 toes on the front and back feet. So it all has to do with the front feet and how many toes it has, depending on the families. They are arboreal, which means they live in the trees, and they spend almost all of their time up in the trees. This is why they develop such big and amazing claws that we will talk about. So their really big, amazing claws are used to hang off of branches, also to climb up trees, but they do mostly hanging. And the claws are actually there so they don't have to use any muscles to hold on to a tree branch, which is pretty important, because if you spent this much time, which we will talk about, in the trees and you had to hold on to a branch, you would probably be very tired. So they just hang on to the branch and have a little snoozy snooze, which is nice. The curved, sharp claws that they have are about 3 to 4 inches, which is about 8 to 10 centimeters long. So not as long as a ruler, but for an animal that is about this size, pretty big claws. And they are, they're so long and curved to specifically hang on to a branch. Their hands are suited for manipulation, but because the claw is so big, they only really use like a flexible palm. So if they need to hold something, whoa, they're going to do it better than me. If they need to hold something, like they're eating leaves off of a branch, they just use their little palm. They don't use their claws or anything like that. Now, sloths are named that because they have a really, really low metabolism. So that means that they take really slow, deliberate movements because everything about them is very, very slow. Now, there's 2 reasons that they're very slow. One is their diet is really low energy. They get all the nutrients that they need from leaves, but the leaves that they get their nutrients from don't give them a lot of power. So they don't really get like a lot of enthusiasm. Eating a leaf makes me so energized. That does not happen. Eating a leaf makes me feel good. Doesn't really make me feel like full of vim and vigor. So the leaves, because they aren't nutritious, they do have to conserve as much energy as possible. And the way you conserve energy is you move slowly rather than being wild and crazy. Now, the other reason that they are really slow is they want to avoid detection from other animals that want to eat them. So there are a few animals that want to eat sloths. There are big harpy eagles. There are big cats like jaguars and ocelots. And then there are some snakes like anacondas that want to eat sloths, because sloth mammals, they are animals, they're made of meat. And so a meat eater would want to eat them. But if you are very slow and you spend all your time in a tree not moving, an animal that uses its sight to hunt, or it uses hearing, it's not going to hear you and it's not going to see you. So you can hang out in the tree and avoid detection, which is exactly what they do. Now, you might have seen the shaggy coats of a sloth. Now, they are shaggy in a certain direction because they spend so much time upside down. So most of like our hair grows down. The hair of a sloth grows the opposite way because they spend so much time upside down. It just feels nicer that way. So that is also kind of cute to think about. Now, you might have also seen they have this long shaggy hair and they have green algae on them. Now, this green algae also camouflages them in the trees. Which is important. Again, they can just pretend that they're part of the tree when animals want to hunt them. Now, it's green, so it looks like a tree. It also smells not excellent. So animals like jaguars or ocelots, big cats that use their sniffer, they will not see, or they won't see with their nose. They won't smell the sloth. They'll just smell all this algae and go, probably nothing off that tree. Now, the algae that does cover the sloth is interestingly called sloth moss. And sloth moss. It is very, very hard to say, everyone. I should have practiced this. Now, the algae does carry all sloth moth eggs, and they only exist on sloths. And so it's this really interesting symbiotic relationship that means the sloths hide from predators, and these moths have a place to live in this algae. So they live together, they help each other out, and they're happy about it. Why wouldn't you be happy? So they move through the canopy. They spend so much of their life in trees, most of it, and they can move through the canopy at about 40 yards a day. Kind of slow. They munch on leaves, they eat twigs, they eat the buds off of these trees. But what they mainly do is they hang up in the trees and they just snooze. They don't really have a lot of energy for anything else. And why would you want to? They live in Central and South America where it's really warm, and because their metabolism is so low, they also get energy from the sun. So they don't warm themselves up, they use the sun to warm themselves up. This happens in the same animals that are cold-blooded, like lizards and snakes. Even though they're mammals and they're warm-blooded, they use the sun to keep them warm because, again, there's going to be way less energy that they have to use. Sloths are not lazy. They are deliberate, an important word to use. They do spend about 15 to 20 hours per day sleeping, and they spend about 90% of the day motionless. So even if they're not sleeping, they are literally just hanging out. Not really doing anything, just, meditating, feeling really nice, having some time. Now, sloths can be between 60 to 80 centimeters, which is about 24 to 31 inches long. Depending on the species, they weigh between 4 to about 8 kilograms, which is 8 to about 18 pounds. Two-toed sloths are slightly bigger. They have rounded heads. I'll show you both pictures of them. And they have teeny tiny little ears. Both sloths have little stubby tails, but the two-toed sloth has an even stubbier tail, which is about 6 centimeters long or about 3 inches long. Now, remember when we were talking about how many vertebrae giraffes had? They have 7, just like us, just like every other mammal in the world, except for manatees and sloths. So sloths don't have 7 vertebrae in their neck. They actually, interestingly, have 5 to 7. Two-toed sloths do. Three-toed sloths have 8 or 9, which is really interesting. Why do they have such long necks? We don't actually know. We know that it started happening in prehistoric times. We know that their necks started getting longer. We don't 100% know why. But there are a lot of theories out there. Now, sloths, because they spend so much time hanging out and they do kind of look around for that 10% of the day that they're not motionless, they look around and they can move their head 270 degrees, which is the same amount that an owl can move its head, remember. And an owl has, sometimes it will have 14 vertebrae in its neck. So maybe the reason they have so many vertebrae is so they can move their head all the way around and look around. We're not sure. I'm going to put my money on that one now. Sloths do have color vision, but they don't really see that well. They also have poor hearing, so they don't really rely on their hearing or their sight, even though they can move their head around. They're not doing a lot of remember when we were talking about owls that do a lot of looking and hearing and doing stuff. They're not lazy, they're deliberate. They use their sense of smell and their touch to find food. Because they spend so much time in the trees that they're eating, they don't have to go and hunt. They don't have to look for a specific berry or a specific fruit. They just, will find a good smelling bunch of leaves. That is too quick for a sloth. And then they will just eat the twigs and the nubs off of the trees and the leaves. technically, two-toed sloths are omnivorous, and so they can eat insects. Most of them do not. They just hang out with leaves, but they can. Now, their metabolism, like I said, is really, really slow. So that means everything about them is slow, including how long it takes them to digest food, which is super neat. Sometimes it will take a whole month for a leaf to go into its mouth and get totally digested by a sloth. Now, sloths have a bunch of bacteria in their stomach that does a lot of the digesting for them. So they don't even digest their own food. So the bacteria in their stomach that is digesting all the food, they are getting the nutrients from it, again, by doing not a lot of work. So it's another symbiotic relationship. They are helping they're giving a home to this bacteria, and the bacteria is digesting and breaking down old food so they can get the nutrients from it, which is pretty cool. Sloths, because of their slow metabolism, also are like superheroes, and they can survive a lot of injuries that could actually kill other animals. I've read a few accounts of sloths unfortunately getting hit by cars or falling over trees for different reasons, and they survive because their metabolism is so low and deliberate, and it just keeps on working even though it's slow. They're very like mindful, meditative little beings. Now we all want to know about poo. Why wouldn't we? It is super important. So three-toed sloths climb down the tree to go poo. We don't actually know why they do this, because on the ground, they are very, very slow. They're slow in the trees or even slower on the ground. So we're not exactly sure why they would crawl down to go poo, but they only have to do it once a month. Because it takes them a month to digest everything, they poo once a month. So they crawl down, poo, and then go up again. Some scientists think they do this because of the bacteria that is in their stomach lays eggs, and those eggs, if they fell from a tree, would be harmed. So some scientists think that through evolution, the sloths survive, the ones that would crawl down to go poo, rather than just like hang up in a tree and poo. Some other ones think it's just they are just showing off that this is my tree and no other sloth should come here. But again, another mystery of science. And this is why Animal Chat Time is so cool, because we know so much about these animals, but then we know not all of it. So we can ask these really cool questions, and later on we can do lots of research and say, now where did this giant marine sloth poo? I don't know, but I kind of want to know. So like I said, they're very, very slow. Sloths will move at an average speed of 4 meters, which is 13 feet per minute. Now, if they are chased by a predator, they will move at 4.5 meters or 15 feet a minute. So their maximum speed, not very great. Now, and that's in trees. On the ground, they can only walk 3 meters a minute, which is 9.8 feet a minute. And that's because their back feet, I have my little friend. So their back feet are so small, they don't actually use their feet when they are on the ground. They use their big old claws to drag themselves across wherever they're going. And so that actually means that they're the slowest mammal on Earth, and they're actually slower than some snails. So that is why it is important for them to hang up in their trees. But strangely, sloths are really good swimmers. They can swim at speeds of 3.5 meters, which is 44 feet per minute. So they're like slow where they live, they're slow on the ground, but get them in a pool or get them in water and they are doing butterfly. They're not doing butterfly, but they're going very fast. Baby sloths actually learn what leaves to eat by licking their mom's lips. They can taste what leaves are good, and then they smell it later. Just a very interesting, cute little thing to think about. Now, another super important thing that I need to tell all of you is how massive a sloth poo is. Very important that you all know they are huge. So when a sloth poos, it is 1/3 of their body weight.
Wow.
That is, I know, right? It is so much. So sloth scientists will say, like, when they're looking at sloths go down from a tree and then they poo, they can actually see their stomach like deflate, because that is, yes, Carol, that is a lot of poo. Now, we did have someone ask, how do you see sloths? How can you see a sloth? Now, the best way to see, go into nature and go on a hike with a conservation biologist guide, someone that respects nature, respects where they are, and respects that, you know what, sloths are wild animals and they want to stay wild. You can use binoculars and you can like see up into the trees and you can see their little shaggy coats with all their algae and their moths and everything. This is the best, and I would say only way that you should be seeing a sloth. A lot of sloth rescuers and vets that I read about said that sloths are not happy when they're in captivity. They love being in trees. They love, and it does make sense, right? They want to be in a tree where it's quiet, where they can just literally hang out and do their own thing. When they're in captivity, they're often woken up. They can't go to sleep. They're really solitary creatures. And so what happens to a lot of sloths is when they're in captivity, they do become depressed. But good news, because the metabolism is so low, and because it takes like quite a lot to make a sloth physically unhappy, when they're mentally unhappy, what a lot of sloth researchers and vets and rescuers will do is they will just take the sloth who's in the middle of being rehabilitated or fixed by the vet, and they'll just bring them to the trees, and the sloths will go up in the trees and they will just start healing themselves, and they will just be immediately happier. If a sloth is in captivity and stops eating, then good veterinarians and good conservation biologists will take the sloth just to the forest, and the sloth will immediately start eating again because they're happy. So if you want to see a sloth, you got to go to the jungles of Central and South America when it is safe and see them that way. I do see that we have some questions, but I'm going to show off some pictures first, because then you can get a really cool understanding of how big their poos must be, because it's so important. So you can see this is an excellent picture of a sloth. You see its round, adorable little face. You can see its 3 toes, its 3 claws in the back. You can see its little nubbin tail, and it is just hanging out, being the cutest. The wrong button. Now here's another excellent picture of another 3-toed sloth, and you know that it has 3 toes because the front has 3, the back has 3, and you can see how round its very lovely face is. You can also see how long its arms are compared to its legs. You can also see its long, mossy hair all over it. And here is a little baby that is hanging off of its mom. The babies, very cutely, will use their moms like giant forest hammocks. So they just hang out with their moms for about 25 days before they start to hang themselves. But imagine a sloth as a nice little mom hammock. They're cute. Now here's the difference between a 2-toed and a 3-toed sloth. You can see that the sloth on the right-hand side has, well, 3 toes. You can also see it has a very round face. It doesn't look as much like a mammal as the other one that has quite a nice little snout. looks a little bit more like a primate, a little bit more like a monkey, or even closer to an armadillo that they are close to in evolution. They look just a little bit different. And then, yeah, here is just another picture of the three-toed sloth because they are just so cute. Unfortunately, they do always look like they're smiling. And so people used to think that they could be in captivity because look at the sloth smile. As it turns out, they're smiling because they want to just hang out by themselves, be little solitary creatures. So those are some sloths. I know they have the cutest faces. So we have some questions, which is excellent. How do they find a mate? It's an excellent question. So they are super solitary creatures. They don't mate for life. They don't hang out with their mates at all. What happens is a lady sloth will call out into the jungle and say, "Hello, I would like to have a child, please." And then male sloth goes, probably do that. And the male sloth will climb down a tree and will like crawl through the jungle and climb up the tree. Now, if there is water between the sloths, if they're in like a mangrove forest, things like that, the male sloth will jump in the water and swim that way. Because again, they don't want to use a lot of energy. They conserve all the energy they can, and they do that by swimming. Why do sloths spend all the time in trees when predators can climb trees? That's also a very excellent question. They spend all their time in trees even though predators can get them because that is the safest place. If they are up in a tree and they smell like moss and they look like a tree and they are difficult, they don't ever move. And so if you are a wild animal that is looking for things that are moving in the forest canopy, you wouldn't see a sloth. And so while it is dangerous to be in the tree, it's way more dangerous to be on the forest floor or somewhere where they're not completely camouflaged. How long do they live? So that's actually a really good question. All of them are good questions. But for some species of sloth, we don't actually know how long they live, which is kind of cool because we just don't know a lot about them. One of the reasons is they're really hard to study because they're really hard to find. Even sloth scientists will go into the jungle looking for sloths, but the way that even humans see things is we look for movement. So unless we like climb up a tree and like poke around and, oh, that thing is furry, it must be a sloth. It's really hard for us to find sloths. So we don't know how long all of them live for. We think sloths live between 5 and 20 years, which is quite a lot. Are sloths on all continents? No, so sloths used to be on a lot of continents. In the prehistoric record, we had sloths all over the place. But now sloths are only located in Central and South America. Can sloths swing from tree to tree? No, so they can't actually swing, even though they have, their really long claws that could be good for swinging. That would take way too much energy. So they don't do any swinging. They just are really slow, deliberate, crawling down the tree because they don't have a lot of energy. And they also know that any swinging they did from tree to tree, a predator would see them and go, that looks like delicious food. So they just go really, really slowly down the tree and go like, I'm just part of the tree. I'm just a moth, just a moth.
How intelligent are sloths?
Ooh, that is a great question. So sloths, like I said before, they're not lazy, they're deliberate. And I think that makes them also very clever and very intelligent. They know what they want and they know how to get it is to be slow and deliberate and do their own thing. I think it also shows when they are in captivity and they're sad, it also shows how intelligent they are because they know what will make them happy is being out in the forest and doing their own thing. So while we don't have any studies that have shown sloths using tools or communicating in lots of different ways, we do know that they have been along for millions of years, generally that means they're pretty smart. They know how to survive in the wild. What are the predators of sloths? So the predators of sloths are harpy eagles are big ones that spend a lot of time in the trees and they look down. Oh, perch, that is an excellent sloth. I saw that. That looks great. Anacondas also can eat sloths. And then some big cats in the jungle like margays or ocelots and jaguars can eat sloths. Generally, sloths do get eaten when they're on the ground. And so if they're up in the tree, they're generally safer, but it's when they're moving on the ground, when they're pooing, that's when animals see them. Are sloth brains slow as well? That's a good question. I am not sure. I think that their brains, so how fast they think, is probably fast. They probably think as fast as we do, but then they have to be deliberate about everything they do. Their camouflage is the reason that they have been on Earth for, more than, well, for millions of years. So I think they probably spend a lot of time in like a meditative state. They're very mindful of what they're doing, and they're very deliberate, but they probably think pretty quickly and go, yes, this leaf is delicious, and I am going to sleep for 20 more hours.
Why do sloths move so slow?
Why do they move so slow? So that Daniel also had that same question. So the two reasons that they're so slow is they eat generally only leaves, and those leaves don't give them a lot of energy. And so while those leaves are delicious and they give them all the nutrients that they need to live, it doesn't give them a lot of energy, so they can't be running around the forest. The other reason is them being slow is a part of their camouflage. So they have to be really, really slow so the animals that want to eat them don't see them. So the algae they have, the backwards growing fur, the way that they just hang for, remember, sometimes they hang for 90% of the day. That's almost the entire day. All of that is so they're conserving energy, and so the animals of the forest don't see that they're there. They're very happy to just be by themselves. The introverts of the forest. How much time does it take for a sloth to process a thought? Oh my gosh, this is such a good question. Well, remember, it does take them a month to process a poo. But don't actually know how long it takes them to process a thought. But it's, like I said before, this is why animal chat time is so good, because you can take these questions later and, do your own research and your own science. And, if we don't even know how long some sloths live for, we definitely need to know a little bit more about how they think and how long that takes. Oh my gosh, what is a sloth dance? You guys. Ooh, can they defend themselves against predators? Okay, you guys keep on doing that sloth dance because it looks excellent. They can't defend themselves against predators. And that is why their camouflage is so important, because even though they have these really big, remember, they're like 10-centimeter claws that look huge, because they are so slow. They can't dance quickly. They also can't really defend themselves. And so it's so important for them to be mindful, to be zen, to just hang out and take another nap, which I really like. I think we can learn a lot from these sloths.